From the PEP Radio Newsroom, this is the morning news for September 30th, 2025, and these are the stories we are covering at this hour. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the Federal Emergency Management Agency won't be funded if a shutdown occurs, but a large part of FEMA's disaster-related operations and spending would continue because that money comes from the Disaster Relief Fund, which has about $10 billion in its coffers. Nearly 85% of active FEMA staff, more than 20,000 people, would remain in their positions during a shutdown, according to a Department of Homeland Security memo. A former FEMA administrator, Pete Gaynor, said FEMA's critical disaster functions and some non-disaster duties would continue in the event of a federal shutdown. But he says some other aspects of FEMA's work would be impacted. For instance, he said some grant approvals would be paused and no new policies could be written under the National Flood Insurance Program, halting new mortgages requiring flood insurance. The Trump administration is pursuing new ways to cut off Harvard from future federal funding. The administration is referring the university to a process called debarment, according to a letter Monday to Harvard President Alan Gerber from the Office for Civil Rights in the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. A federal judge in Boston ruled earlier this month that the government must restore $2.2 billion in research funding to the Ivy League university that was frozen earlier this year. Talks between the university and the Trump administration over anti-Semitism issues on campus have stalled, and the government is seeking a new way to cut off the university's federal funding. The process of debarment basically would declare Harvard ineligible to do business with the government. YouTube has agreed to pay $24.5 million to settle a lawsuit over Trump's account suspension after January 6th attack. Google's YouTube has agreed to pay $24.5 million to settle a lawsuit by Trump over his 2021 account suspension following the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. According to documents filed in federal court in California, $22 million of the settlement will be contributed to the Trust for the National Mall to help pay for the construction of the White House State Ballroom. The rest will go to other plaintiffs, including the American Conservative Union. Google is the latest big tech company to settle lawsuits brought by Trump. In January, Meta Platforms agreed to pay $25 million to settle a lawsuit over his 2021 suspension from Facebook. Elon Musk's X agreed to settle a similar lawsuit brought against the company then known as Twitter for $10 million. In other news, a federal judge in the nation's capital has agreed to temporarily suspend the Trump administration's plan to eliminate hundreds of jobs from the government-funded broadcaster Voice of America. U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth ruled that the U.S. Agency for Global Media cannot implement a reduction in force that seeks to eliminate 532 full-time jobs for government employees. Those employees represent the vast majority of remaining staff at Voice of America. Carrie Lake, the agency's acting CEO, announced in late August that the job cuts would take effect on Tuesday, but the judge's ruling preserves the status quo at the agency until he rules on the plaintiff's underlying motion to block the reduction in force. Voice of America was founded to counter Nazi propaganda during World War II, which explains why Trump wants to get rid of it so badly. The vice president, as he appeared with Republican congressional leaders at the White House on Monday, said it was not reasonable for Democrats to use their proposals as leverage to shut the government down unless we give you everything you want. He called that preposterous and totally unacceptable. But last year, when Vance was a senator and Congress was similarly staring down a potential government shutdown, albeit over different sticking points, he embraced the idea of some Republicans using the threat of a shutdown to negotiate. Well, why shouldn't we be trying to force this government shutdown fight to get something out of it that's good for the American people? You know, that sounded an awful lot like South Park. Vance said in a September 2024 podcast interview, why have a government if it's not a functioning government? Turning to Pennsylvania news, Recently hired corrections officers at a Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution were allegedly sexually assaulted by a fellow corrections officer earlier this year, according to Pennsylvania Attorney General Dave Sunday. Garrett Smead, age 29, of Warren County, is accused of handcuffing and sexually assaulting two corrections officers at SCI Forest in May while he was employed at the prison, Attorney General Dave Sunday said. Property of G. Smead was allegedly written by Smead on one of the officers, and they both were left handcuffed until others could come and free them, according to Sunday. Smead also would remove his clothes before allegedly sexually assaulting them. In a statement, Sunday said that what Smead did was dehumanizing behavior, and that whenever an officer of the law is charged with a crime, it hurts the public's view of law enforcement. That's the news at this hour. If you're watching our news videos on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel. PEP Radio is now on the Live 365 app, the PEP Radio page at paequality.com, Roku, and Alexa. Up next, we have the Meadville area weather forecast here on PEP Radio.